Oh, that's cool. All right, beautiful. So, all right, so let's actually I want to talk about a couple things. One thing, of course, is the eclipse that happened last week. Actually, it was last Sunday, and it was really amazing. It was beautiful, a little bit different than the last eclipse that I filmed. You guys may remember, it was a couple years ago, I guess, that I filmed eclipse in its entirety. I was one of the first people, I think, in the community to get a P900 and filmed it and put that up, and it was really really cool. But yeah, this time was a little bit different, not too much, but still spectacular. But as I watched the shadow go over the moon, I just kept trying to visualize how in the world the Earth, could be causing that. I mean, I'm certain, obviously, that it isn't the Earth, but I'm trying to think, like a heliocentrist, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how does that shadow work going over the ball in those angles. And try as I might, I was unable to figure that out. But admittedly, I'm also the spatially challenged one. And Morga, John, didn't you do something on the eclipse talking about that in the angles?
Yeah, well, it wasn't just the angles because we know that that's all jacked up, but this was something else entirely. And maybe I can do a screen share. If you want me to do it now, I can, or we can do it at another point. But it was just doesn't work at all in the ball theory. Like totally debunks the ball Earth theory. I think.
Yeah, I think so too. That's of course, there's several types of eclipses that debunk the ball theory, not just the lunar eclipses. But the Selenelians is another one, of course, that just simply doesn't work. And when we went last year, I guess it's back in 2017 now that we went to see the eclipse as it went over the United States. That was amazing, first of all, but it was so interesting because we had all those cameras on it, and literally, I mean, Chris had his telescopes out there. We had several P900s. BM Bo had his cameras out there, and out of all that footage, we were never able to, brighten one up enough to get Earthshine. And of course, we've had people that talk about that they were able to do it, and some people, and I think even you said it on your presentation that you're one of the people that actually do believe that the Earth is eclipsing it. But I'm still kind of out on that. I'm not so sure that it is the
Well,
moon.
you mean in solar eclipses?
On
I
the
believe that the moon is eclipsing the sun,
Right. Oh,
but in
isn't that what I
solar
said?
yeah, no, you said the Earth eclipsing it, but no,
I'm
I think
sorry.
I know what you meant. No, you're
Right.
good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm still out on that one. I mean, it's, obviously it seems like it should be in the right position. Everything seems right about it. But, the anomalies that happened during the solar eclipse um, were just really, they just didn't seem like it was actually the moon that was doing the eclipsing there. And like I said, we were never able to brighten up any pictures, bright enough to get any earth shine off of any of them. So I don't know. It's kind of a conundrum for me, but I really tend to believe that there are either some sort of black bodies up there, or there's something going on with these Rahu and Ketu nodes, as people call it. And I'm certainly not going to, make any absolute statements on it, but I do find it intriguing for sure. And yeah, if you want to share your screen and show what you came up with on the eclipse, absolutely, we can do that.
Surely. Let me pop into Skypeinator and I will share my screen here.
All right.
As soon as I can remember how to do it. It's so rare that I ever share my screen on these that it seems I forget.
Yeah, it's the little white dot with the two monitors in it. That's screen sharing options is the one you want to go to.
Yeah, I clicked the wrong thing, and so now it hid that. So let me hide the chat box. There we go. Okay, share screen. Yay. Okay, so this is what I saw with my own eyes, and you guys, if anybody else witnessed the eclipse, tell me if this is what you saw as well. Let me make this a little bigger, but okay, so basically, I was looking, but when the eclipse started for me, the moon was more or less like 90 degrees overhead. And when the eclipse started, it came like up from the bottom, like at this sort of angle, and then slowly, started to come up this way, and then you had like this sort of effect, and then it totally eclipsed the moon. But then what happened was the shadow started coming back down this way, and the eclipse left that way. So, like, diagramming this out in the ball Earth theory, what the moon would have had to do is like come this way and get in the shadow of the Earth, and then regress the opposite direction. Like, I don't see how that works at all. But again, what we saw was this, and anybody else who saw it, let me know if you guys saw a different animation or whatever. And the rabbit in the moon was facing this way from my perspective, so he was right up and down. The shadow, whatever the shadow is of, and humoring the ball Earth theory, it's the shadow of the Earth, comes up this way, eclipses the moon, and then came back down this way. Like, what in the crap? But did anybody else notice that, or was it just on the eastern seaboard?
I don't know. I saw it kind of go up, and then it seemed like when it was uneclipsing or leaving the other side of the eclipse, it was going to the side. So, yeah, no, I didn't see that at all. And of course, the video that I was showing earlier shows a little bit different. Were you watching that video at all, John, that showed the eclipse and how it was going?
Like the time lapse before we went on?
Yeah, it came down from the upper right-hand corner, and then it went up from the lower left-hand corner.
So it kind of did like, hang on. So it kind of did like one of these numbers. Oh, stop it, you thing. So it did like this, basically. It came down this way.
No, the other, from the upper left-hand corner.
From the top left. So it came down this way.
Yep.
And then which way did it go?
And then after it went down and across, then when it uneclipsed, it came from the lower left up.
So it went like that way, basically.
Like
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the only thing that makes sense to me as far as that goes on a flat Earth kind of model is if you were to put a circle up on your ceiling and were to eclipse it from one direction, you could picture in the room that you're in, there would be a north, south, east, and west. And so each person in each location would actually see that get eclipsed in a different direction, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You put so that's why I understand it in a flat Earth model. In a globe Earth model, makes no sense at all. And even I was trying to, shine shadows from my globe onto a tennis ball, and no matter what I do, as soon as the top part of the shadow gets on the tennis ball, which would be the moon, you actually get a happy face shadow, not a frown face shadow like John's showing here. That little, I guess you can call, like that. But instead, the shadow actually shows up on a ball the opposite way. If you can kind of picture that red line being a happy face rather than a frown face. So I can't,
right,
yeah.
And that's like art class 101. So if you're shading a spherical object with a shadow, like it would be basically more or less like this.
Correct. What you just did there,
like that kind of, well, bad artwork, right?
Well, it's almost like the shadow should be the bottom part there of the red, but with a.
I see what you're saying. So basically,
I get. Yeah. Now pull that blue line down. Yeah. But pull that blue line that goes across the moon, kind of pull it down like a happy face.
Gotcha.
You have a straight line across the middle of the moon there. If we could pull that line down, that's the shadow that I get when I try and shine from a shadow from my globe onto a tennis ball, which is not what we see at all. We see, I'd have to.
Yeah, it's weird because there were several people that came out with challenges to the ballers to actually model this. And I'd like to see it modeled too. I mean, because it certainly helps me, that's for sure. But it just didn't make any sense. And I was sitting there watching it going, this just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense that, the Earth would be crossing it and shadowing in this path the way that it is.
Well,
in fact, the red part of the shadow that supposedly the atmosphere filter the light and only leave the low frequency electromagnetic frequencies of the light, so that is why it's start completely black, and supposedly in the full shadow of the Earth is turned into transparent red, and then comes again to totally black. I'm talking about the shadow. I mean, you can believe that the atmosphere filter the sun rays, and blah blah blah, but what? I always trying to talk with with people anytime that they pointed out the lunar eclipse, and I say we are in 2018. 18 and 19 with 100 of satellites with the ISS and supposedly the Lunar Orbital Recognizer, and they shut it down because the battery maybe go down, and then turning up again the battery of that Lunar Recognizer Orbiter after the eclipse. I mean, we don't have any real video showing from outer space.
Are you serious that they actually shut it down and they use that as an excuse?
Yes, I have the official video from NASA, and they
my
show
God.
the battery. Yeah, and the motion graphic is like a battery going down, and we shut it down to prevent that maybe we cannot start again the Lunar Recognizer.
And then you can see totally why you have China that goes to the dark side of the moon, right? Because they don't have to turn around and show people the eclipse. They don't have to show people the Earth. It's so easy to fraud because there's nothing visible from the other side of the moon. So it's easy to say, oh, yeah, China landed there and here's some photos. And nobody can say, well, can you show us the Earth? Nobody can say, can you show us the eclipse? Because they'll say, oh, sorry, we're on the dark side.
Exactly.
We're on the back side.
Yeah, it's really pathetic. I mean, we have literally supposedly 100 of satellite with imaging capabilities. We have the ISS. Nobody showed an eclipse from outside of the Earth. No agency, ever.
Yeah.
Well, the other big thing too is like people across the country were getting different visualizations of this eclipse. So either either the rabbit in the moon was a different angle, or like the eclipse, the shadow was coming, like you said, Jaron, instead of seeing what I saw, there were people, like I believe on the West Coast or getting out towards the Midwest, where instead of the shadow coming up from this direction, it was like coming up from this direction. But this just blows me away how, from what I saw, again, this is what I saw, the shadow coming up this way, and then it was eclipsed for a little while and then came back down the way that it came. And I just, for the life of me, I just don't see how that can be rectified at all in the globe Earth theory. But I mean, think about what all's wrong with this. Like, in order for the shadow of the Earth to be so minute in space to where it only covers the moon for a brief period, that they have to have this sort of peculiar angles of the sun casting a shadow that diminishes in angular size proportionally with distance away from the Earth. And, frankly, you can do experiments all day long with light and shadow, with a single light source, a single obstruction, and just try to get it to where the angular size of a shadow decreases in angular size with distance from the obstruction. That is just absolutely not how light and shadow operate in reality. And furthermore, I just have to add this in there. This completely disagrees with Eratosthenes' method of, quote unquote, measuring the circumference of the Earth by the shadow angles of the sun, because in order for his method to work, the light rays from the sun must be coming in at parallel lines to one another. So let me just pull up a diagram for that as well. Give me 1 second.
And I can show after, I just drew a quick little scribble just to show what I'm talking about as far as the way that I can get a shadow to appear on a tennis ball from a globe object, no matter where I move my light source, at least that I've been able to see, and somebody can prove me wrong, that'd be great. But I'm seeing the shadow appear on the smaller item as a happy face. I'll show that as soon as John's done here.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that goes sort of back to art class stuff. Like if you've ever taken an art class, one of the first things they teach you is how to shade objects to give sort of a depth, like a 3D depth. And so you can tell the difference between a sphere, a cylinder, a circle by how it's shaded. And you're absolutely right. But so again, just to give visualization on this, in order for Eratosthenes' method to work, the light from the sun must be hitting the Earth parallel to one another. But so this just flies in the face because in order to have this very peculiar stylus pinpointer of a shadow from the Earth hitting the moon, you've got to have the solar rays sort of converging on one another at some point and then diverging and creating this non-demonstrable, completely made up shadow of the Earth, which diminishes in angular size. But again, unless the moon changed direction in its orbit, I just don't see how we got this effect where the shadow of the Earth allegedly, transits the moon, and instead of keep on going this way, as you would expect, no, it regressed the way that it came. So just absolutely crazy. But I'd love to, and I haven't looked at the comments, but I'd love to see if anybody else had noticed that. And I would like to see that time lapse that you were rolling before, Bob, because that's not what I saw.
Yeah, it is amazing. And, there's so much footage of it from, people all over the world were taking footage of it. So, there's lots to compare, that's for sure. But that's so amazing that, NASA makes lame ass excuses about the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. That would have been, beautiful to see some footage from that, or, one of the thousands of satellites that are up there that supposedly have, cameras on them and stuff like that, but they don't, and they can't, and they won't. And so at NASA, the trolls will come back and say, well, NASA isn't going to have to, cater to your flat earth wishes or anything like that. And yet NASA does all kinds of coverage on the moon. They write about it, they show phony CGI stills, they show all kinds of stuff. But the one thing that they never, ever have done, and they never will do, of course, is actually show a picture of what's going on. So it's just absurd.
No, in fact, NASA, I believe sometimes the people forget that how many times NASA talks about us. So they are aware of us, and they need to respond some of our petitions, if you want to see it that way. I mean, it's not just an agency that, who are the flat earthers?
Yeah.
They know us.
Yeah, they do. But, again, they're never going to, and all they can do, the more we breathe down their neck, of course, the more all they're going to do is, contact all their mainstream buddies, the people that are actually behind this lie, to attempt to shut us down. And that's what, this whole show is about, is going to be about today, essentially. But it's ridiculous. All, even eclipse proof, that's one of the simplest things that they should be able to show us. And instead, they give us things like the Himawari, and it amazes me that the Globers come and say, oh, but the Himawari shows you all the time what's going on, and it's like, yeah, it's a screenshot about every, 6 minutes, 10 minutes. Sometimes it's not even that. It's certainly not consistent by any means. And it's so blatantly CGI, it's utterly ridiculous. It's a composite. And the reason it takes that long is because they've got to composite it all together. So.
Well, and a quick question. So I'm looking at this time lapse that you've got, and this is of the same eclipse from this week?
Yes.
Okay, and so what they're getting is they've actually got the eclipse, the shadow hitting the rabbit in the moon in his face, like coming from the front of the rabbit, whereas definitely 100% for sure, where I was at in Florida, the shadow was coming up from the bottom of the rabbit, up from the bottom, a little bit off to the right. So what I don't understand in the globe Earth model is, how is that possible? We should all be seeing the same thing regardless of where you are. And I think that this right here is really good evidence that the moon, what we're seeing is the moon is not a physical object. It's not light reflecting off a physical object, but it is some sort of, and I hate to use the word hologram, but it's some sort of a, it's some sort of a hologram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really what Carl said, John. When I was talking about putting a circle up on the ceiling in your bedroom and then showing an eclipse from one side, well, you're absolutely right. No matter where you're at in that room, north, south, east, or west, you would see that shadow enter the same location of the moon. So it may be different. Somebody might say, well, I saw it on the right side, and somebody might say, I saw it on the bottom, and somebody else say, I saw it on the top. But when you're talking about, the rabbit in the moon or the man in the moon, or say a certain crater, well, if the eclipse starts happening over that particular part of the moon, that should happen for everyone. It just might look differently where they're at. But what you're saying is that it actually started at a different location of the moon altogether. If I heard you right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It really did. Like, it came from the bottom a little bit to the right of the rabbit, and the rabbit was, upright from my perspective. But even in this animation, we just saw the shadow come from basically hitting the rabbit in the face, like the top left of the screen down, and then it regressed up to the right. So I'm sorry, but you should see a perfectly, in the baller theory, you should see a perfectly rectilinear path of that shadow. Like, there's no excuse for this. So, but what can you say, though? I mean, there's so much evidence against the ball and against the heliocentric model that just refutes it hands down. This is yet another thing, but I mean, what are the ballers going to do? They're going to come up with some lame brain excuse to preserve their comfy, cozy little paradigm. I mean,
Bob, if you reflected just about 10 seconds, just to where the shadow just starts on the moon, maybe a little right there. That's good. So if we can see how that shadow is starting to appear on the moon, I'm going to share my screen real quick and just show, hopefully this screen, share screens. Yeah. Do you see my little drawing here or no?
Yep, we got your drawing. Okay,
so what I'm saying is when I do a shadow test of putting a globe and then a tennis ball a little distance away and using a light, is I see this shadow. So the shadow begins with this happy face. And then as it gets to halfway on the moon, so for instance, you're showing a shadow coming this way, right? That's what we just saw. We saw this shadow doing this. But if this is a sphere, if this circle is a sphere, then the shadow will not appear that way. The shadow would appear this way, with this side being black. Obviously, I'm not doing a good job of showing that. But I'm saying that and you need to go do this test yourself. Go find a globe, find a tennis ball, put it, you can try and put it 30 Earths away, as they say, but the shadow would actually begin this way on the moon. This is the way that when I try and do an experiment, by shadowing, you would get this kind of an arc. And then when it gets to about halfway, you see it like this. And then as it goes away, it goes this way because it's a sphere. And it needs to act as such. But if you go back now, I'm done sharing. But if you go back to what you were just showing, you'll see that that's almost like a very 2D kind of shadow. And it's like what John said. It appears that the moon is not a 3D real object. That's not how the shadow acts on it. The shadow does not act as if this is a sphere. If it did, then the shadow would have to start shading in this case, as it comes down from the top left, right here, it would start to shade it in a frown face formation. But this is actually coming in as a happy face shadow. See there, we actually get I don't know what you want to call that, the open of the ellipse or the inside of a circle, but that's not how 3D objects are shadowed. And so if I'm wrong, then it has everything to do with the scale, which is always the issue, right? Because I can't go into my garage and put a tennis ball 30 Earths away from a globe, and then I think I've done the math on it, and I would have to then take I would have to get 10,000 feet away, so 2 miles away, and use some sort of light source that's, I think 150 feet in diameter. That's just to get the scale right. I mean, you couldn't even get it correctly scaled, but this is not how 3D objects are shaded.
Exactly.
Right.
Well,
like you would expect to see, like at this point, actually I'm looking at the live stream, so it's behind, but at the point where the shadow gets about halfway, you would expect the curve to invert. Like it's almost as if you're looking at a circular shadow transiting a flat object. Absolutely. If it is even an object. And, I'm the first one to tell you, I don't care. It doesn't make a difference to me whether the moon is spherical or concave or convex or flat. The Earth we know is flat, and whether the moon is spherical or what, it really doesn't make a difference. But I think this is really excellent evidence. I mean, everything that we've just talked about, but especially your point here with the shading. If the moon was a sphere and the Earth was a sphere, and that's a shadow cast on it from the Earth, you would expect to see that the line of the shadow to invert at some point when it crosses over the center of the moon. It's plain as day.
Yeah, and the other thing that when you try and get the scale right, and when you're trying to do it, in a scale model, the shadow would become so diffuse that you really wouldn't be able to see any specific form over anything. So that's another thing that has always puzzled me. When you try and move the object that's casting the shadow further away from the light source, or closer to the light source, and further away from the object that you are casting the shadow onto, the light becomes so diffuse it loses all form. You just get kind of this darkness, like a never-ending penumbra. And that's another thing that I thought was really strange about, the eclipse the solar eclipse, when we did that a year and a half ago, is that, there was no penumbra. It went from dark black to daylight, just like that. No penumbra whatsoever. And, we all commented on that, thought it was bizarre. So, I mean, everything about these eclipses is wrong. And I just don't understand how the Globers really can reconcile this. What I'd really like to see is somebody take a composite of all the footages that were taken of the eclipses around the world. And
I agree. It'd be awesome to see.
Yeah, exactly. And do kind of like an angle study on it and show the impossibility of it, because this is something I can, kind of see in my head, and a lot of people are talking about, but we need somebody that can really, bring these things all together and model them. But it just doesn't work. Not
Well,
bad.
and definitely guaranteed without even having to see like such a compilation. But you're right, I think that would be awesome. But based on the people that I spoke with during the eclipse, we were all getting different versions of the eclipse depending on where we were at, and there's just no room for that in the ball theory. It's just none.
Yep, absolutely. And also, hat tip to Mike Flatbird for this. I don't know if this is actually his footage or not, but he took the entire eclipse and just kind of sped it up and brought it to a 20-minute or a 3-minute presentation, which is pretty cool. So hope that answers your question, Nathan. But yeah, there you have it. All right.
It's amazing. That's amazing that, like, because the rabbit in the moon is like, if it weren't for that, then they could just say, oh, well, it's just your perspective. But that rabbit in the moon, if it is all craters as they say, there's just no way that we should be getting different versions of the eclipse. It should be 100% homogeneous no matter where you're seeing it from. So I'd love to see what the ballers' answer to this is. I mean, this is yet another checkmate moment where they'll just continue on, with the ad hominems and hoping that people don't look into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, the only thing that would, make any difference is if you were seeing it from north of the equator or south of the equator. Obviously, it would appear, kind of upside down. But that would also, I guess, depend on where precisely the moon was,
Right.
In between the tropics when this eclipse was actually happening, and then use that point as the dividing line, between what you would see from the top side and the bottom side. But I don't think it adds up. And this could be one of the easiest killers. If this is really put together well, for a presentation, even though I think most people can see how it just doesn't jive with what they show us. So anyway,
Yeah.
all right, cool.